Mike McClellan, welcome back to Australian Musician.
Thank you, Greg. It's a great pleasure.
On October 24, you embark on a new tour, which goes through to the end of November.
Mm.
And you're stating that this is the last long tour. Why are you saying goodbye to long tours?
I'm getting tired of the amount of travel from where I live, Greg, up on the Sunshine Coast on Castaways Beach. Traveling by car, which is most of what I will do when I tour the East Coast, is getting tiring. For those that may not be aware, I've just turned 80 actually, back in August. And whilst I'm still loving performing, I'm still fully engaged with my creative life. I'm still, as I think I'd mentioned before, very fortunate in that my fingers are in good shape, the voice is in good shape. So all of the physical side of what I need to do and the mental side of what I need to do is working beautifully. It's just that the travel's getting tiring.
Yeah. We touched on a few things that you wanted to do in the last interview. Maybe we can go into a little bit more detail on that. The memoir, which involves 80, I think, of your lyrics.
That's right.
Where are you at with that?
There's 95,000 words of that completed. It's in front of several publishers at the moment, and I'm waiting for some feedback. A couple have said, no, thank you. It's not really the sort of stuff we're looking at publishing. Um, I've sampled it to various industry people. There's probably another maybe 5 or 6,000 words I will add to it before I think it's finally done. But I'm pretty pleased with it actually because it started out initially as something at the request of a couple of students whom I've been teaching songwriting to, who wanted to know the background and what stimulated some of my songs. And when I sat down to write a response to those questions and add that analysis to the program I was running with the Woodford Folk Festival people, I suddenly realised that I was starting to tell as much of my own story in writing what prompted the songs, and thought, well, there's probably a good way to build a memoir around my music and my songs and my lyrics in particular, because so much of my writing has been prompted by what's been going on in my life at the time. And it seemed for me as a songwriter that my personality, my life, and the things that have been moving me and the things that have been important to me, or in other ways have impacted me, were the things I'd written about. So therefore, it became simply a process of extending the story behind all of the lyrics across my creative life.
All right. Are there other memoirs of musicians that you've enjoyed reading?
Oh, quite a few actually, but there are very few that do it the way that I've done it. The only one I can really recall, apart from um, one or two that are simply books of lyrics, is a very, very good book by Paul Kelly called How to Make Gravy, which was essentially him doing a similar thing, although um, the the copy around the song lyrics doesn't necessarily spend a lot of time on the lyrics. It spends more time on what was going on in his life, etc. The other book of note is the one of Paul McCartney's lyrics, where he pretty much took all the lyrics that he has written over the course of his creative life and tells a bit of the background of what was going on during the time of the Beatles, and then subsequently in Wings and subsequently in his solo stuff. So they were the two that really prompted me to think, well, maybe there's something in the way in which I might tell my story built around my lyrics. I have read a lot of other biographies, of course, and autobiographies of musicians and songwriters. Um, and perhaps one of the most powerful influences on me is a wonderful book by Jimmy Webb, um, which talks about writing in a more technical sense in some ways, although when he approaches lyric writing, it's fascinating to read the way in which he creates his lyrics, because not only, of course, is he an absolutely brilliant melodist and a wonderful arranger, he's a fine lyricist as well. You know, there are some songs of his that number among one of my or two of my very favorite song lyrics.
Yeah. Have you ever met Jimmy or worked with him?
Yes, I have actually. He toured Australia some years ago when I first met him, and he was out on a vineyard owned by a very dear friend of mine called Andrew Patterson, and played a concert in the afternoon out there. We played subsequently later in the evening and chatted. He was fascinating company actually. He's what you would probably call a closet pessimist in some ways. He's not very up, but he's very, very fiercely intelligent. And I found his insights and his comments on what was going on in the industry and his life at the time to be quite fascinating.
Yeah, he actually has a grandchild here in Melbourne too.
He does, which is one of the reasons why he comes back fairly regularly, I think.
Yeah. One of the other things you were telling me that you'd like to get to was an acoustic album, re-recording some of your older songs. Where are you at with that one?
Um, I've actually expanded the concept a little more than I had originally thought. I haven't started to record it yet, but I've got a bunch of new songs actually, which will probably consume the majority of what might be another CD. Although these days, of course, releasing CDs seems almost irrelevant, when much of what is listened to is done by downloading or streaming. And I I've got 4 or 5 songs of my back catalogue that I'm going to record. I put it to one side to record it, largely because the memoir has consumed a great deal of my time. And I began to write in a fairly concentrated period of time, and a bunch of new songs have emerged that I'm very pleased with actually. So I'll go into the studio next year, probably around April, I think, and just sit down in the studio with the guitar and do a solo acoustic one. I'll probably wind up doing somewhere in the order of maybe even 20 songs, and then pick and choose what I think is going to make up the most appropriate releases. Um, but that that's really simply no more, Greg, than a product of me continuing to be stimulated intellectually and emotionally to continue to write, because it's something I've done ever since I was a kid. It was always something that drove me, and as I've said in the memoir, I lived with music in my head right from the days when I can first remember my hearing music that really moved me. And that sense of living with a constant melody running through my head, or lyric lines to accompany it, is something that's really never left me. And it seems silly not to pursue it and not keep doing it, because it gives me such joy and I get an enormous amount of emotional satisfaction out of doing so.
Yeah. Do you view songwriting more like carpentry in that it's built piece by piece, or more like gardening?
Do I dig up songs? I'm not sure.
Grown and nurtured.
Um, it's it's interesting. I often get asked by students and by others who are interested as to what my process is. And almost invariably, the question becomes, what comes first, the words or the music? And I inevitably answer that by saying, well, they actually come last, largely because I find songwriting a process, first of all, of mulling over an idea, of having something that I really want to write about. And that starts in my head, first of all. And it's only after I've got a clear sense of what it is I want to accomplish in trying to complete a song, that I will then sit down and complete the lyrics and the music. And the more I progressed as a songwriter and got better, or as I think I got better as a writer, the less I relied on simply just strumming the guitar, and I started to think about the guitar in the way in which a piano player might think about writing on the piano. So the left hand becomes the bass lines, and you fill out the melody and the chord with your right hand. And I tend to think like that when I go to the guitar after I've got an idea in my head. So the consequence of that is that all of that that's going on inside my head initially is what drives the impetus to sit down and finish a song.
Yeah. It's interesting. I interviewed Jackson Brown once, and was telling me he was writing a song or started to write a song on a guitar at home. Then he went on tour and tried to revisit the song on a different guitar in a different location, and it didn't work. And it wasn't until he got home and picked up that same guitar that he could finish the song. I'm just wondering, with your three DeGrucci guitars in different tunings, whether you reach for a different guitar that might suit a song.
I do actually, and I fully understand why he would find the process difficult to complete on another guitar when he'd started it at home on an earlier one. And there are some songs where, for me, the process of actually having the guitar in my hand can sometimes feel like it's perfect for the direction I want to take that melody in, or alternatively, it can feel slightly uncomfortable. So I'll go to another guitar. And there are some songs that you just know, and I've got no particular understanding of why it should be, but I just know that it will work better on a particular guitar rather than any of the others. I still have my lovely old Gibson Hummingbird from the mid 60s, which I've had and worked with all my career basically. Um, and I have a lovely tiny bodied guitar that was made for me by Robin Moyes. And that old Gibson is not much good for finger picking any longer for me because my fingers have got a little fatter. It's got quite a narrow neck. And in fact, when Gibson um, reproduced that original style, they actually made the neck on the reproduction a little wider um, because it was always regarded almost as an acoustic guitar for electric guitar players. Um, but there are some songs where I know that rhythmically it will work better on that old Gibson than it will on one of Brian DeGrucci's guitars. So yes, I fully understand why Jackson Brown would make that comment.
Yeah. Who taught you to finger pick?
Um, I didn't have any lessons with anybody, but having said that, of course, I listened to everybody who was playing fingerstyle guitar, and my early influences were very broad, actually. There are two books by the late Happy Traum that were really important in giving me the fundamentals of how to fingerpick. His books were enormously important for a lot of people who wanted to start out trying to work out how to play fingerstyle guitar, because he transcribed in both standard notation and in tablature the way in which quite a number of players pick the guitar. Um, Doc Watson was one. Um, the astonishing guitarist Blind Blake was another. Chet Atkins was another influence. Um, an enormous number of early blues players were significantly influential in me learning how to fingerpick too. And once I'd got the basics down, um, I then began to expand and explore what I did with my right hand to enable me to find ways that eventually started to make my own playing identifiably more me rather than the influence that I'd began listening to when I was first starting out back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So as we said at the start, you're taking your songs out on the road again,
I
uh,
am.
last long time. Are you treating this tour any differently to any others that you've done?
Probably a little, in that I've written and almost completed writing um, a new 2 hour show, which will encompass my history. I will take some of the cues for the show from the memoir that I've almost completed. Um, I'm going to play some of the songs that most influenced me when I first started out. One of those huge influences was Tom Rush, um, whose music I've always loved, and he was a fine guitar player as well when he first started out. And his early influences were the blues essentially, and his first 2 or 3 albums were mostly recreations of old blues music. Um, and to this day, I still play Tom Rush's "No Regrets," um, which is such a beautiful song. And I'm going to throw those things back into the program. Um, I'll probably, again, as I said, take my cue from the memoir and tell a few more stories about the things that happened to me during the course of my touring life and my musical life, and some of the people I've worked with, some of the people I've supported. I recalled actually when writing it that I toured with Roger Miller, uh, who turned out to be the most delightful company. In most cases, when you're a support act for an international act coming into Australia and playing concerts, they barely if ever talk to you. You never have much social communication at all. But I spent a number of nights after concerts with Roger and his guitar player, sitting in his room, swapping songs, talking about the industry, sharing a beer or two. And he paid me an enormous compliment at the second show. He didn't know me in the first show. He met me briefly. He knew that, I was a songwriter and I'd had a hit. Um, and he came and stood at the side of the stage whilst I did my second set to hear what I was doing. And as I walked off, he looked at me and said, "That was good." And I thought, what a delightful comment to make for someone who's just a young kid starting out in the business here in Australia. And you have an enormous reputation as a songwriter. And I sat with him and asked him to play songs that he didn't do on stage after the concerts. And he was the most engaging company. He was a really delightful man. And, those sorts of stories are part of what the memoir's about, and they'll come into the show as well.
Yeah. You must have been through so many towns touring Australia over the years, at cafes or petrol stops. You must have seen Australia change a hell of a lot since the early
Oh,
days.
oh, dramatically, really quite dramatically, Greg. It's been extraordinary to go back to some of those places that I hadn't played in a long time. There are some places where that change is barely noticeable. And there are some places where, for instance, um, some of the old uh, town halls and concert halls and theatres have been beautifully refurbished. There's a lovely one in Tumut, for instance, which when I first went to Tumut was in pretty much disrepair, but it's been completely restored by a very enthusiastic group of local people. Um, and you see some of those small halls. I'm about to go to Bermagui and play the Murrah Hall. Uh, and, it's probably 150 capacity. And there's a lovely hall just south of Grafton, um, which has been completely restored by the locals as well, where I've played a concert. And for many of those little places, that restoration has turned those halls into arts centres that have flourished because of the commitment that locals have made to um, A, keeping it alive, but B, using it, because a lot of those old halls had fallen into disrepair and were never used for a long time. So it's been a real joy to go back and see some of that restoration. Um, Rural Australia has not changed dramatically unless it's some of the bigger centres. Um, I'm still, uh, I still go back to some of those little places I played and think, hasn't changed much at all, really. Um, Populations have not grown substantially. A lot of the young kids, of course, have up and gone to bigger cities and bigger provincial towns. Um, the one thing that has improved in a lot of the places I've played is the roads. Some of the roads we travelled on when I was first starting out were pretty ordinary. I once did 60 towns in 10 weeks touring for the Arts Council just in New South Wales. And I have to tell you, mate, we travelled some pretty awful roads.
Oh, what do you like to listen to while you're driving?
Oh gosh, all sorts of stuff. I've I've got a huge CD collection, which I've had to put onto USB sticks because my car no longer has a CD player, just has a slot for a USB stick. And I listen mostly to songwriters. Um, Although my tastes are very eclectic, I've gone back and rediscovered some of the early music of, you know, people like Miles Davis. I still go back to some of his early recordings, which I loved, um, and I love listening to uh, Bill Frisell, jazz player. I I'm a huge fan of the music of Danny O'Keefe, and Danny has continued to write um, really powerful music right throughout his life. And he's a year or two older than I am. I think he's about 82 now. Um, and I've never forgotten introducing my dear friend Geraldine Doyle to Danny O'Keefe for the first time when we were traveling. And I had a cassette in my car at the time. And I played an album for her called American Roulette. And it's it's just a stunning record. So yeah, songwriters are mostly whom I listen to. Um, and I go back every now and then to um, even some of the Sinatra stuff, whom I've always loved. Watertown was an album that when he released it was, put it this way, politely reviewed, but it has become over time regarded as one of the best things he ever did. Um, and I've gone back and played that while I've been traveling, and I've loved it. It's a glorious album, really is.
Yeah. If you had access to a time machine and you could revisit one day in your career, do you know where you'd go?
Oh gosh. Um, One of my most vivid memories as a performer is walking out onto the stage at the Perth Concert Hall. And Perth was always a very good market for me. I could fill that concert hall back at the peak of my career. And I've never forgotten what that felt like to walk out onto that stage, carrying a guitar with 1,500 people in the theatre. Um, and there was one utterly magic moment, which I'm pretty certain almost every performer would really cherish. I played a song of mine that I've continued to play all my life, and I still love playing it. A song called Saturday Dance, which got covered a lot. At the end of doing that song, there was what seemed like an eternal pause before applause. And it was almost as though people didn't want to break the mood. They didn't want to interrupt how they were feeling by applauding. I mean, it probably was no more than, 2 seconds, maybe three. Um, but it was one of those magic moments when there was such a hush in the hall with all of these people. And it felt remarkable. And I thought at the time, oh, maybe they didn't like it when I when I first finished it. And you get that sudden intake of breath as a performer on stage, knowing that one way or another, you've probably, when the applause came, you've probably fulfilled what you really have always sought on stage, which is for people to become so absorbed into your music and the things you're writing about and the things you are saying that they take it on board both physically and emotionally. And for me as a songwriter, that's been my ultimate objective, to move people, to find a way to make them think, to make them feel, and to seek a response. And when it comes like that, it's quite extraordinary, actually.
Yeah. Well, Mike, it's been great to catch up again. You've got a lot to do, a lot of writing still, and we look forward to seeing you out on the road.
Lovely. Thank you, Greg, very much. It's always a great pleasure, mate. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Cool, that was great, mate.